I would say the overwhelming majority of people could probably use some degree of improvement within their hip extension capabilities. And we can do this in a lot of different ways, which I will get into, but I want to discuss the biomechanics and anatomy of hip extension and what we can do to then restore it. If we're just walking or running, we need to be able to extend the hip behind us so we can push from one side to the other. If we're going to be doing a squat or a deadlift, as we get into hip flexion, or if we're in a squat, deeper levels of hip flexion, we need to push and achieve this relatively in-range hip position where we can maximize the recruitment of our primary hip extensors, such as the glutes and the hamstrings. The adductors also attach on this lower pelvic bone right here. So if I am in degrees of knee flexion that are, again, more significant, then those muscles have leverage to create that hip extension as well. But if I'm in less knee flexion, think of something like a deadlift pattern, where I am just in a little bit of knee bend, then I have more leverage to use my hamstring to create that hip extension. And it's not like the glutes wouldn't be working in that circumstance. Everything is going to be contributing to some degree, but depending on the position of these bones and joints, we're going to have relatively more or less contribution of those primary hip extensors. This is what we can refer to as a substitution for hip extension. So if I'm in this anterior pelvic tilt, my lumbar extension increases, and I can then create fake hip extension. As this leg comes behind me, if I can't get it all the way back, I'm just going to dump this pelvis forward instead. And then you have an ability to still get the leg behind you and extend the hip, but you're going to be using a lot of low back to do that. Another common substitution for a lack of hip extension is early knee extension. This can occur in a variety of ways, whether we're walking or especially running, but you can also see this in something like a squat or a deadlift. So if I'm going to try to extend my hip from this hinged position in a deadlift, then usually what happens is as they come up, they will extend their knee too early because they can't get their hips underneath them. So what ends up happening is they get stuck at the top with this anterior orientation or pelvic tilt, and their knees lock out first before they can get their hips fully underneath them. This can also happen in normal walking, but it's very pronounced when we run or sprint. What we need to do when either walking, but especially sprinting, is maintain a degree of knee flexion as the hip extends first, and then the knee will extend relatively more after that. But if we can't do that, we're going to strike the ground, and then this knee locks out early, which pushes the hips forward, and then there's an excessive forward lean. So whether you're a high-level athlete or just someone that's trying to improve their posture, hip extension is going to be important for you. There's a couple of tests we can use in order to determine where we are at first, and I will link those down below in the article I'm writing alongside this. But let's start to talk about what we can do to actually improve it, because we should be able to do a drill or an exercise and retest after and see an immediate improvement. If we didn't, then that probably means that it's not going to work for us. That's why I like to use these objective tests. So let's get into what we can do. The first thing I want to do is keep people within the amount of hip extension they can achieve without one of those substitutions. So I'm going to start people off on the floor in positions that are easy to maintain, where there's lots of references, meaning that things of our body are touching firmer surfaces such as a ground or a wall. So that way we can be safe and we can work through this range of motion and improve it slowly over time. And then I'm going to get people more upright in positions that are harder to maintain in deeper levels of hip extension. And that's going to be a good progression from literally the ground up. Another important consideration here is the power of using the breath and an exhale to control the position of the pelvis. A full exhale will take me from a position where I'm here to finding these obliques, which help pull my ribs down and rotate my pelvis back. So we really want to make sure that we're emphasizing that full exhale in the following drills. This is the supine cross connect activity with an opposite side reach. The purpose of this activity is to train the hamstrings and a little bit of the glute to control the tilt of the pelvis while introducing some rotation from the rib cage and thorax. So to start in this position, we want a foam roller up against a wall or some sort of hard surface. And what we want is for the ability for this knee, whichever leg is extended, to stay about 90% locked out. So there's a 10% bend in it. The first thing he's gonna do is, Trevor, I want you to push into the wall with the knuckle of your big toe. So the ball of your foot right underneath the big toe is gonna have some contact along with the inner edge of that foot right here. Now, I also want him to feel the outside lateral toe right here. So he's got that tripod sensation within his foot, but he's pushing through the inside edge of his heel and his big toe. So he's gonna push into that wall first, and then he's gonna dig down slightly, and he should feel this bottom side muscle hamstring engage right here. He's gonna pull back with the other leg, and he's going to get to right about here, relatively 90 to about 100 degrees. Now, he should feel no hip flexor pinch. If he does, he can come a little bit further forward, but ideally you want to come back right about here. Now he's going to take his opposite side elbow, that would be his left elbow, and he's going to reach it for his right mid-thigh without his head coming off of the ground. Good. Now, Trevor, I want you to keep a nice open mouth as you sigh the air out. Good. So as he exhales more and more, he's going to feel these same side abs of the leg that is flexed. That's going to be his right abs in this instance right here. He's going to hold that compression in his right abdominals as he inhales through his nose and still stays reaching to that right mid-thigh, and also keeps the points of contact on the wall and digging down onto that foam roller. This is the supine wall stride activity. The purpose of this is to drive some nice end range hip extension on the leg that is on the wall here. So to set up for this, we want to be in about a 90-90 position, meaning a 90-degree bend at both our hips and our knees. Now, Trevor, what I want you to do is I want you to give me a nice exhale, feeling your whole foot flat on that wall as you dig down on that wall with your heels, and you're going to create a little bit of a tuck as you lift your hips slightly off the ground. The tuck should come from the hamstrings, not because we're trying to crunch down excessively. Good. Now what I want you to do is pull this leg back. Good. You should not feel a pinch in the hip, only as far back as you can get without feeling a pinch. Now reach this arm towards the ceiling and this arm overhead at about 140-ish degrees. And then what I want you to do is I want you to give me a nice exhale. Every exhale you do, you're trying to bring this leg back a little bit more and get your hips slightly higher in the air. Now upon that exhale, I want him feeling the inner edge of his foot arch on this wall. That would be the knuckle of the big toe right here and the inner heel. That's going to give him pressure to push into the wall and dig down. And that should give him a good bit of glute max on this downside hip right here. And as he inhales, he's gonna keep reaching with this arm. And upon the next exhale, this leg is going to come back a little bit further. These hips are going to get slightly higher in the air, but he's not losing that contact of the ball of the big toe and also the heel on this wall. So as he gets higher and higher in the air with each subsequent exhale, he's feeling a good bit of that glute on this leg right here. He should feel no pinch on his hip flexor on this flexed leg right here. If he does, he's probably coming back too far and needs to back off a little bit. This is the supported hip lock drill. The purpose of this activity is to maintain active hip extension of the down leg while the other leg goes through external rotation as well as a swinging out phase. This is going to be challenging for a lot of people to maintain contact of the back foot on the wall. So here for Milo, we've got this towel bunched up, and he can then reference that push into the wall with his left heel as he brings his right foot forward, as we want to do. You can adjust how thick that towel is based off of how much that person struggles to keep that full foot contact. So Milo, what I want you to do is keep that full hip extension. So he's gonna start tall, and he's gonna just slightly tuck his hips, not losing any height in his skeleton as he does so. Now, that PVC pipe, or whatever you're using, should be there to stabilize himself so he can keep a nice, even trunk position. And now, Milo, what I want you to do is take that leg and make a nice, big swing up and across and through, maintaining that hip extension on that back left leg. And now he's gonna do the inverse. He's gonna take a big swing out, around, and back. Really nice, minimizing how much he's turning, minimize how much he's relying on that PVC pipe over time. But if you really want to rely on it at first, that's totally okay. Let's go one more rep here, Milo. Nice, up and around and plant, maintaining that tuck at the top, and then out, around, and back. Perfect. After we achieve the ability to get more hip extension, I think it's very important to then load ourselves and use weight-based exercises to take the muscles through a full range of motion, so that way we can own it and strengthen ourselves in these new positions. So that way these gains can last over time. The following exercises I like a lot for doing that. This is the rack-supported single-leg kickstand hinge. The purpose of this is to use the rack as support to take away the need to stabilize and balance, so we can use more load and drive more output through hip extension. So to set up for this, we want to have our free hand, the one of the same leg that is forward, just gently supporting on a rack. We're not death gripping it, we're just gently holding it there. And then we have this back leg and a little bit of hip extension, but we have 90% of our weight on our front foot, making sure we're feeling our tripod of the heel, the big toe, and the little toe here. Now, we want to be holding the weight in the opposite side of the foot that is forward. And we want to keep a very slight knee bend to start. And then we're just going to pivot around this back hip, reaching that weight from more of the midline of the foot there, and then coming up into full hip extension. Nothing too crazy here. Just make sure that you're keeping a nice neutral spine, ending in full hip extension with your hips slightly tucked underneath you, and you're not leaning on this back foot, making sure that you're keeping 90% of your weight on that front foot the entire time, just gently holding the bar. This is the Landmine single leg hip thrust. The purpose of this activity is to train the glutes and the upper fibers of the hamstring and a full range of motion of hip extension. To set up for this, we want to get on a bench with the Landmine off to the side of the same side of the hip that we're going to be pushing through. So this Landmine bar is coming right into sort of the inner thigh, right about here where it's resting. It should be nice and comfortable. He's also got his shoulder blades on the bench. The lowest part of the shoulder blade is the part that's just in contact with the bench here. That's going to allow him to hinge down and up. So what we want to do is keep our hands linked on our low ribs to make sure that we're not extending. If these ribs push into our hands, that's a sign that we're not going to be getting hip extension. We're going to be arching through our back, and that is a substitution for hip extension. That's lumbar extension. So make sure these ribs stay down. Now what we want to do is lift the other leg up to about 90 degrees, and we want to feel the inner edge of the heel, the ball of the big toe, but still keeping this little toe right here in contact with the ground, but pushing through this inner arch. So we're gonna load and hinge down, dropping our hips to the floor, keeping everything connected, and then exhaling, pressing through, and getting full hip extension without these ribs pushing into our hands. Inhale down, exhale up. Very, very nice. To summarize, hip extension is one of the most important things I care about right off the bat with any client that walks into my gym and wants to improve their movement. Can they move through a full range of motion of hip extension? Can they own that through load? Those are the questions that I'm going to be asking, and if they can do that, a lot of things tend to clear up over time, whether that's anterior pelvic tilt that someone wants to improve, whether that's back-related issues, or whether that's just the ability to fully recruit the glutes and hamstrings in a loaded environment.